And what kinds of innovations, what kinds of solutions do you think will be needed to fix some of those issues?
Thank you, Geeta. The disadvantage of not being amongst the first speakers is that a lot has been said and I don't want to repeat it. So actually let me take another approach which I hadn't thought about before coming here. We should, going in line with the theme of the conference, Globalization 4.0, the single biggest challenge to all of us is climate change. It's upon us, and some of us realize that what has to be done. And I think that when you're looking at supply chains, the biggest disruption that can happen in supply chains are natural disasters. So if you're coming from that angle, the developing world, the emerging economies are much more susceptible to supply chain disruptions because of climate change. And so what is it that can be done to make our supply chains more green and less susceptible? Definitely, technology has a role to play. You mentioned AI earlier. So there's a mismatch of supply and demand. There's no linear, demand is not linear, and supply needs to be non-linear also. For example, Alibaba will sell 80% of whatever they sell on 4 days of the year, right? How do you ramp up the supply chain and then bring it back to normal or on the regular level when if that scale doesn't exist within the country? What is required for that scale? Aside from technology, I think infrastructure is definitely there. Ease of doing business, corruption. I mean, even in the US, when Katrina struck the US, the government wasn't able to respond as fast as Walmart was to bring the blankets to the affected people. Yes, they made a profit out of it, but I mean that's a lesson for us that sometimes the governments are not efficient enough, fast enough to act, and that leads to supply chain disruption also. If I come back to just touch upon technology and AI, and you mentioned blockchain also, access to, so if AI is able to predict at some time in the future if it's snowing, what would Joshua like to consume on a Friday, for example, that's the level. If we get to that individual experience, then emerging economies are not going to be left behind, because these economies usually have a huge local market. Purchasing power is a question mark, but they have huge local markets. And if we're able to give the customer experience, we've been talking about supply, but if we deliver the customer experience to the recipients of the population in general, the recipients of these goods and services, then that's something that's very exciting for the future, because that means that less people are going to be left behind than they have been in the last 30 years, as you mentioned. Globalization has happened, but I think there's a unique kind of globalization that's on the cards, which is basically localized globalization, and in which we're able to look at individual demands and serve that individual to a level where no matter what happens no matter what kind of disruption happens, that person is able to be serviced. And again, just to recap, it's going to be about technology, like for example drones. They could be far off places in India or Pakistan or in Africa where you're not able to deliver. It's not feasible. It's going to cost you $100 to deliver something, whereas rest of the countries it's $5. So how do you get to that person? You don't need to send a truck. You can send, maybe drones have a role to play, and that's just one that the boring company that Elon Musk has started. I mean, that's a concept also. That maybe delivery is happening through that. That's how mail used to be delivered in the UK, in the early 20th century. So maybe there's, so we need to look at, in my opinion, we've left the individual out, and we need to look at that, how to service that individual, and design our supply chains such that that individual is served.